brasileira, meu amor, Brasil.
Woohoo! What a big room. Hello, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I think, for some of you. Welcome, my name is Anne Maria. I am the community manager at Butter. Today is day 2 for Collab Fest. It's a conference, a 2-day conference where we are deep diving into several topics that link or relate to collaboration in this distributed world we're living in. The music you're hearing in the background can be locally controlled, so each and one of you can hover over the bar at the bottom and you can play around with the volume if the volume is too high for you. And also what you see now on the left side of your screen is a poll. And my invitation to you is to let us know what are the challenging situations you're most facing when leading groups virtually, remotely, when you're hosting your sessions, your workshops, your meetings, etc. What is challenging? And all you have to do is click through all of the options and then don't forget to send away the answers. Otherwise, we won't be able to see them and they won't register in the poll. All right. Yes, I see some of the examples coming in. Okay, keep them coming. Beautiful. So today's session is we're all going to talk about that. Techniques to handle difficult situations, different challenging personalities. We often call them challenging participants. We're going to get to the bottom of that. I guess we've all been in a workshop where we really felt that not everyone was equally involved or equally committed to the common goal. And that's what the session is all about. And because it's a panel, we are going to focus a lot on your questions. So feel free to use the chat throughout to add in your examples, your challenging situations, the thing that keeps you up at night when it comes to hosting workshops. And we're going to surface them for our panelists today. Thank you so much for adding your replies. I definitely see there's a lot of asking irrelevant questions that derail the workshop. I guess we can all empathize with that. Someone that comes in and kind of bombs our planning and our workshop, and it's getting really hard to bring it back on track. I see a lot of takes too much space dominating the conversation. All right. I tend to do that as well. I tend to be at times the dominator. As you can tell, I like to talk. So let's see how we manage these types of personalities. Lectures, personal opinions, feels really strong about something and they want to kind of like put that word out there. What else do we have here? Jokes around and takes nothing serious. Okay, that could be me as well at times. Cameras off, no way to read the room. Uses authority, interrupts, multitasking, etc. Yeah, so we've got a bit of everything. I kind of expected this salad of challenges, and I guess they're all relevant for us. So I am going to take a screenshot and surface this later on. Zack, there we go. For now, I'm going to end the poll. All right. And I am going to open another poll. And if you've attended Collab Fest, you know what this is. It is just me trying to figure out, take the temperature in the room and see who here is meeting Butter and meeting us for the very, very first time ever. Who has never attended a Butter session and who is like, I know this till Anna Maria. We've known each other. We've hung out before in Butter. As you enter your replies to the poll, I am very, very excited to kick it off and introduce the speakers. And we're going to add them to the spotlight in a second and kick off the session. Before that, I really do want to mention that today we have a big giveaway. So if you are hearing anything that really sparks your brain, it's an interesting insight, a takeaway, we are inviting you all to share it on your social media, on Twitter and LinkedIn with the hashtag Collab Fest 2022, and make sure that you tag us so we can find your posts. And by the end of the day, we are going to pick one lucky winner, and we're going to supply them with free butter for life, the business account, and we're also going to give away one free butter yearly license to lucky winners. So there you go. If you were kind of on the fence and wanting to try butter, this is your cue. Share your takeaways from this session on social media and enter the raffle. Okay, so I know I told you that I'm one of those folks that dominate the conversation. I'm trying to change that, and I am very, very happy to welcome our two panelists today. Will, hello, say hi to the camera. Yes.
Morning.
Hello,
evening,
good
middle of the
morning.
night, wherever you are.
There we go. Will is a senior designer at Mettle Studio, a design and development agency rooted in a love of making things. He has also held visiting lecturing roles at the Royal College of Art, Loughborough University, and the Brunel University. Will leads teams that create brilliant digital products across a variety of complex domains, and much of his time is spent bringing order to chaos, whether that's unearthing insights during UX research, or building a robust UI design systems, or facilitating creative workshops to break new ground. And Will hosted a brilliant talk yesterday on the power of critique and how important that is. So if you've missed that, make sure that you catch the recording that we're sending out to everyone next week. It was a very insightful talk. Will, hello. I'm super happy to have you today with us. Yay. Okay, and then we have Joao. Hi. Hello.
Morning.
Good morning. Joao Sevillano, I think I've messed that up completely, but feel free to tell us how we pronounce that correctly. I always try to kind of like Spanishize things. Discovered his taste and curiosity for words early on. He graduated in applied psychology, and since then has maintained a clinical activity, remaining really close to psychoanalysis. More recently, he has dedicated himself to the creation and facilitation of learning context. It's really close to home because I'm very interested in learning design myself. First, he was very much involved with the European School of Coaching, where he was the pedagogical director and managing partner, and now he's the managing partner and co-founder of Way Beyond. Joao is also frequently collaborating with academic institutions where he tries to make psychology for non-psychologists accessible. He visits, among others, the Porto Business Schools and the Nova Doctoral School. Wow, Joao, there's so much more to say about you and actually your background. So I could take up a lot of space, but I'm really, really happy to have you with us today. And thank you so much for joining. So thanks, everyone. The poll is closed, and I am going to spotlight our two panelists. And so we have, I already mentioned that we can use the chat for the Q&A, so feel free to do so. And we're going to manage that later on. And I have a couple of questions to kick us off and kick the conversation started. So usually, us people, whenever we are in social situations, whenever we're surrounded by people and we're part of a group, one of our deepest wishes is to be liked and to belong and to blend in a group. So this kind of rubs off or comes in contradiction with the personalities that we sometimes kind of label as difficult or complex in workshops or meetings or sessions. So I wonder, how do we reconcile these two thoughts, like our innate desire to be liked and accepted with this rebellious behavior, if we can call it like that, in virtual sessions? And so, Joao, I'm going to pass this first to you, and you will feel free to add anything to it as well.
Well, thank you. The danger of this question for me is to enter into deep psychology and interpreting personality and group dynamics, but I'm not going to do it. I think that, yes, I agree that we want to be liked when we are in social situations, although there are very different ways of manifesting that desire. Some people do it by being submissive, others do it by being rebellious, like you said. For me, the idea, just going to one possible conclusion, is to try to give space to people, both individually and as a group, to find a common track that serves the purpose of that gathering, meeting, or workshop. Of course, that we facilitators have some work to do there, because it's important to set at least a goal, an end to that meeting, gathering, or workshop. But giving space, for me, is one of the ways to accommodate different kinds of manifesting those desires that are on the table for this question, and also to give space to the unknown, to the things that are not designed yet. Of course, saying this like I did sounds a bit poetical, and it's not always easy because there are people that have very strange and different ways to manifest their desires to be liked and to be part of the group. And many people do it by apparently behaving in the opposite way, like destroying and being the contrarians and such. Yeah.
Well, 1 second. I just have a very quick follow-up there. When you say, Joao, that we have to make space and allow space for that to happen, obviously it means to be ready for it. But from a very practical perspective, we know that, especially workshops, collaborative sessions, as facilitators, we come in with a plan, right, Lo? So we come with an agenda, we have a purpose, we have certain activities planned, etc. This giving space for these conversations to happen, these personalities to showcase and surface, does that mean that we have to be very aware and actually plan that and very mindfully and purposefully into our design from the get-go? Because if I plan for it, that means that my session won't be derailed because I was expecting it. So yeah, what can you say about that?
Two things. One, definitely plan for it. I learned from my experience that if I think an exercise that involves interaction with participants in my mind takes 10 minutes, I will plan it for 20. Just to give space for the unknown and the unpredictable. This is one. The other thing is be willing to let go of the plan. Reading the room, reading the group allows to get rid of the plan or create a new one, possibly in collaboration, in co-design with the participants, without, this is for me very important, without taking away the purpose of that workshop. Never forgetting the purpose of the workshop, but not forgetting the purpose, but being willing to let go of the plan. So two things in my case, in my experience.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Will, what's your view on this rebellious behavior that kind of somehow it manifests one way or other? There's so many ways to
difficult
manifest.
To follow the psychologist on this answer.
Hey, I hear you. I hear you.
I think. I mean, for me, like I guess, like some of the most, as a facilitator, some of the most disruptive, I think, behaviors I see a kind of a sort of a lack of engagement or not engaging. And I feel like that, I struggle to see how that could be driven by people wanting to be liked. I feel like in a lot of cases, when we're coming, I guess Joao's touched on it in terms of when people act rebellious, or you might say show off, or I guess try and dominate because they want to be perceived in a certain way. And for them, that's how they think they need to behave to be liked. But I think it's tough, and I think it's really tough to get groups to, I guess, leave their egos or that desire behind, because it is so innate. And I wonder if I mean, part of it needs to be an open conversation when you're setting up these workshops, particularly when you know. I mean, one thing we tend to do, particularly if we're working with workshops through clients, is that when we've got a list of participants, whoever maybe the lead client is, can highlight people who tend to react in certain ways, so that you as a facilitator know who might need different types of support or different types of attention during these sessions. And so then at least it's not a surprise to you if someone does act up or does try and dominate conversation. So I guess that's a practical tip. I think there's also more of a conversational opportunity around calling out, but collectively to the group, not when someone starts doing it, but collectively at the start of a workshop or any sort of session. I think ground rules that everyone buys into can be very valid, because later on it offers you a point of reference to then go back to if someone is domineering or if someone isn't engaging, two ends of that spectrum. And then you can kind of reference back, we have all agreed to these rules. Let's try and remember them in discussions.
So if my brain tends to land always things to the concreteness. So what I heard were two very practical things from what you just said, Will, and correct me if I got this wrong. The first thing is, when sometimes we're working with groups and we know who those groups are because they are teams, our client brings us in. So we know exactly who's going to be in the room, how many people, and who they are. So when we have that, we're privy to that information. My question there is, what can I do as a facilitator to smoothen that, to welcome, to make sure that I meet those people where they are, I meet their needs? Because I guess we all know that this rebellious, and it might manifest rebellious, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're taking up a lot of space. They may also be rebellious by being too much into their shell and not contributing to the conversation. That might be rebellious as well. So how do we meet them where they are and meet their needs? That was one question that I got there. And the other very practical thing that I heard was this, I think you call it a contract, an agreement of how we're going to behave. And my question related to that is, how do you do that, and when do you do that? What shape does that take in reality in sessions? Bouncing it off to both of you.
I'll jump in on the first one in particular. I think that, I've got a couple of, I guess, practical things on there. So if we're talking about rebellious people who like to dominate, or perhaps who may be driven by want to have a sense of control in the situations, maybe they're used to that, maybe they're particularly senior within the business, and so they're used to dominating in meetings. And then suddenly someone from an external agency walks in and is sort of facilitating. We find it can be quite helpful to give them a bit of a job or a responsibility to do in helping the workshop progress, whether that's something as simple as kind of keeping a track of timing, acting as a scribe. But for us, that's a way of enabling them to have a sense of ownership, control, responsibility, importance, but in a more positive and constructive way to the progress of the session. It's much harder, I think, when you know people are more likely to be quiet. I guess we try and counteract that by just balancing out the types of activities we're doing. So if we know people are particularly quiet, sometimes that's just because their nature, they're more reflective, they might be more introverted, they might struggle in discussional situations, in which case we can build in more kind of individual work, reflection, sort of more specific allocated sharebacks from person to person. When they're disengaged because they don't believe in what's going on, or they actively don't think what's happening is valuable, I'd say that's the most challenging. And I don't necessarily have any answers to that, other than the I guess like the extreme of kind of, if we know people like that are going to be present, really checking if they need to be there and working out if they do need to be there because they're a decision maker or they've got keys to the money in that kind of environment, and it's working out working out what their role is going to be in the workshop and whether they need to participate in all of it, whether they can come in for specific parts. Or it's meeting beforehand and actually trying to get them on board, and get them to buy into the process before the session has even started.
Yeah, I heard from a couple of facilitators, they do that. They have kind of like very quick 10 minutes interviews with all of the participants of the future workshop or workshops, if it's a series of them, exactly for this purpose, to align the expectations. Thanks, Will. Joao, anything to add there? Yes.
Will made me remember a very short story. I got into facilitating and training and teaching, I think a lot because of my father. He was the first facilitator that I knew. He started like 40 years ago. And he has categorized participants in a workshop in 3 categories. One is the tourist, the other is the prisoner, and the third is the participant. And I think it's useful for a facilitator to use a framework like this one to identify which kind of participant the person you have in the room, and to adapt to it. Because you have a room full of prisoners, you might just accept it and go with them. Or prisoners might mutiny, right? Engage in rebellious behavior. And the tourists are the jokers many times, are the ones that are disengaged, multitasking. And like Will said, I think for those, it's important to check if they really need to be there, if they want to be there, if they are adding to the experience and the experience is adding to themselves. And I think it may imply to be a bit confrontative positively as a facilitator, and to get back to the ground rules and to the purpose of the session. Just this.
It's an interesting thing, this thought to kind of try to imagine a framework. And I'm careful not to say putting people into boxes, because I guess we don't want to do that, because that's oversimplistic, and we know that that's not what this is. However, trying to have a mental model of really understanding and trying to mentally be able to process as facilitator certain differences that might be there, which might very much seem like you're putting people into boxes, can be quite useful. Like this archetypes, I think certain people are calling this. There's the archetype of this person, and that might tend to behave like that. And this reminds me of a session that we did, a workshop that we did with the community a while back with Andra, and she talked about these manifestations of this challenging participants, rebellious people in workshop, etc. They're nothing more than manifestation of certain needs that they have, that they feel, as of course some character strengths, but psychological safety needs. So whenever I'm in a new situation where I have to give input, and we know that workshops, they're not a walk in the park. We have to be there, we have to be present, we have to collaborate, we have to contribute, we have to put ourselves out there and our ideas, and can often feel confronting for certain people based on their expectations. So what do I need to feel safe? If I don't feel safe, I might behave in a way to show you as facilitator that. And I have a screenshot of that, and I can pop it in the chat. But there were people that were, it was really interesting. People that kind of, even the level of processing. How do I process the information? As an example, there are people that are, I'm talking to think, or I'm thinking to talk. And how might that manifest? If I'm talking to think, I might take a lot of space. If I'm thinking to talk, I might feel laid back and not involved in the conversation. And you might believe that I'm not there, right? I'm not engaged. But actually, all I need is some time to really process what's happening before I actually put it into words. So that's just one example of the many. And I think it's very useful to be aware of these needs and try to have certain categories. I'm going to stop this here for a second, and I'm going to look into the room and invite everyone to please use the chat to share a challenging situation, something you've been confronted with recently. Let us bring it into the conversation and see how we would all solve that. Also, if you have any idea of someone else's challenges or the conversation topics like tips and tricks and stuff you've experimented with and have worked, feel free to share them in the chat as well, so we can all leave with a goodie bag of I don't know, tactics, examples of what we can do to master these. So my next question to the both of you is, can you share what was kind of like one very memorable situation where you struggled really with when it was happening? What was it? What did you do to master it? Or maybe you didn't, and that was a learning as well. So I'm curious in the context, your actions, and the result of those actions, like the conclusion.
The one that springs to my mind, I think it's an interesting tale of the shift from, we used to typically run workshops in person pre-COVID, if anyone can remember what that felt like. And then obviously we had a big transition to running these online, and suddenly we went from a situation where people who were dominating and kind of taking over conversations used to be, for me, certainly as a facilitator, the most challenging, especially as someone who actually, I'm quite reflective and a listener myself, so it's hard to know when to jump in. But into the online situation where actually people who are just cameras off, mics off, there but very much not there, became the most challenging. And we ran a sort of a workshop with a number of university students, I think at the start of this year, online. A bunch of different groups kind of being facilitated through the same process. And I was kind of, I suppose, existing as a bit of a super facilitator to try and make sure everything across these 4 different groups was moving. And we just had a really high number of people who just weren't engaging with the process. You know, you could ask them questions and they wouldn't say anything. And there wasn't really an outcome to this. I think it was, and I'd pretty love to hear anyone else's thoughts, Joao or anyone else just in the room around. For me, that's become the most challenging thing to deal with, is just people who are digitally present but clearly not actually engaging in any way. When it's in person and people are maybe kind of in the background, you can bring them forward, you can bring questions to them, you can kind of open up the space to them. You can at least see their faces to understand what's going on. You can tell whether they're paying attention or not. That's so much more difficult in this digital realm. And for me, it's the kind of the challenge I don't yet have any kind of answer to.
I actually, maybe we can open up to a bit of a, should we call this a brainstorming? Let's just put this as a case, we've all been there. We've all had participants with their camera off. They haven't interacted in the chat. They haven't really unmuted and so on. Does that mean that they're not engaged? I don't know. How do we figure that out? Because sometimes you might be there and you might still be mentally and cognitively engaged. So probably you're not asking questions, probably you're not typing things in the chat, but that doesn't mean that you're not present and you're not processing what's happening, right? Maybe this opens up the question of the philosophical question, what is engagement, right? But let's not go there for this session. So what have you done in the past to kind of to I don't know, to potentially open up and have an invitation that really worked to pull these people in the conversation. And I'm looking into the room as well. Feel free to add your ideas into the chat and the things you've played around with in workshops. That's a wicked question.
Oh, stumped.
Yeah. So it depends. For example, something that something that I used to fall back on in workshops was these one-to-one breakouts. So you kind of give people a minute. You put an invitation out there that obviously relates to what is it that you're doing. And you want people to process that, in silence for a couple of minutes, and then you pair them up in breakouts and you ask them to share their thoughts and make sense of that invitation and that challenge, whatever it is that we're talking about together. And then again in plenum is kind of fishing a couple of, harvesting some of the insights that they had while in smaller groups. And so for me, breakout rooms is always a very good invitation or example to have everyone voices heard in the room, because they have a clear task. It's clear what they have to do. And if the task is also make sure that you share to each other and you listen to each other, kind of bounce back ideas, then you design that activity to open up for that specific behavior that you're looking to see. And one other thing, if the group is really small, is this: everyone talks for a minute. So we go round and round, and everyone shares for a minute what they believe about this. And again, it goes back to to the design of the activity. And I'm curious to know if there was someone else that, what other tips and tricks you had. Yeah. So there's already some good insights in the chat. Joao, what about your kind of horror story?
I'm having difficulty to choose between two.
Share them both.
They are very specific. Well, the first one, the oldest one, these were two, like the two were like more than 10 years ago, in person. And the first one was I was hired by the Portuguese government to help and implement a new performance evaluation through the whole public sector. And my assignment was to work with people from slaughterhouses in the Azores Islands. I don't know if you've heard of them. And the setting was, the session was in the slaughterhouse, but they didn't have a room. So it was, the session was in the mess hall. It was like 50 people seated in like school benches. I caught the shift turn. So the people that were in session were still covered in blood from killing animals and such. And the thing was, the acoustics were horrible. And my job was to help people understand and explain how their salaries were being affected by performance, because there was no link between performance and salaries. And this was a scary setting for me. I was very green as a facilitator back then. It was like a test to my abilities. And I think that after that, there's no situation that I cannot live. This was because of the setting. The other one was, we got a briefing by a company. The idea was to work with a group of people. The subject was change management. We designed and planned a 3-day workshop for that team. We might say it was a team. And the planning went, I think, for a month. Designing and talking and meeting with the HR and the administration. And when we arrived at the workshop, the participants told us that they were being fired, and that workshop was like a palliative for them. And this, I think that I remember that the first day it was very painful, because we had like people looking at me with their knives, their metaphorical knives and guns pointed at me. Then I realized at the end of the first day what was happening, and what I decided against our contractor was to just open the discussion for the rest of the 2 days. So get rid of the plan and just talk to people. And we had like a major group session, cathartic group session for 2 days, 2 whole days. And then we said that we wouldn't work with that company anymore. And so we did. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing. I think that where the context, and that's something that we rarely think about, especially in the virtual space. Obviously, the tools matters, and the same way is like, where's the room that you're inviting people into to brainstorm, to open up, to talk about, sometimes complex challenges. Is it a slaughterhouse full of blood and so on, or is it the same in the virtual room? Are people able to mute, unmute? Are people and does the tool allow you to give options? Because whenever I think about engagement, and this, I'm going to pull an example from chat that Cheska shared in a session where the facilitators invited people in breakout rooms to open up their cameras and share their surroundings, right? So for every single activities that we're doing, for people that are extroverts and they're kind of leaning into the element of surprise, that this was probably an experience. Oh wow, cool, I like it, right? And for other people, it's like, oh, I'm not ready to do that. I'm not ready to show around my house to strangers in breakout rooms. And when we invite people into a space, and especially when we design activities, I think it's always good to keep in mind this alternative way of engaging. So I'm going to open a mural board where you can add your sticky notes, or you can also share your thoughts in the chat. We're opening the floor to questions. Please feel free to pop them in the chat, or feel free to queue and unmute and ask your questions like that. So always kind of like go with, I'm having a higher, more exposed way of engaging, but I'm also having a lower way to engage, a lower entry point. Open up a poll that's anonymous to ask for questions or for feedback, which where everyone feels safe to share, etc. So I guess that would be one good tip for engaging, giving people options. How do you want to? These are 2 options, right? Or 3 options to engage. So I guess we have to be mindful of, again, the space that we're at. If it's the tool and the space allowing us to do that, to create those options. Very interesting. And someone was mentioning, I think, Pedro, something that Will already, I think, touched upon really briefly, this idea of explicit rules. Some people call it a social contract, some people call it just like rules of engagement, which can be either communicated or designed together at the beginning of the experience or of the workshop. And we kind of all pitch in ideas. Hey, how should we behave in order for this workshop to be a safe space, and to reach our objective, which is X. And we build those rules, and then we're kind of have the buy-in to abide by them. Tell participants the session we have several activities and breakouts, prepare breaks, to have a digital break and so on. So I think that's a great example as well. Any other concrete and very practical ways of mini activities, tools, tips that we can pull and keep top of mind, even example of, I don't know, tools or frameworks that we can have in our toolbox to pull out whenever challenging situations might arise? So I'm looking for this kind of building a toolbox together. In any examples, your favorite methods?
If I may, I think I will not answer with a concrete example, but one, I was listening, and one of the things that came to my mind is, do not design for engagement, design for meaning. People engage if they find the experience meaningful for them. I know this is not concrete, but it might shift the tools and the dynamics and the facilitation techniques that you use. And this for me has been a must, a practice that I do try to keep in my mind every time I'm designing or facilitating a workshop. Don't design for engagement, but for meaning. And this is difficult, and I think it links with what Will was speaking earlier, and you also gave the example of a facilitator that interviewed people before, is to find what boxes might we help to be ticked during the learning experience, the workshop, or the gathering of the session. It's not a tool or a manual.
Yeah. But I think I absolutely stand by that, and I think we all do. Like Will was nodding as well, and I think that if I care about something, if it's relevant for me, if it's alleviating a pain that I have, I will pay attention and I will be engaged. I think that this engagement indeed comes if I look at something, I'm participating at something that is not relevant for me, and it's very hard to engage and contribute, right? So it might not be a tool. However, you are doing that. So if I'm allowed to pick your brain, I'm very curious. Besides interviews, what are ways to do that? Is it do you have a certain type of brief that you're asking your clients to fill in? Are you asking some particular questions that will help you surface that meaning at the real goal and the real, the real core of the problem?
I don't have anything that's quite new or innovative. I think that basic stuff works. Doing your homework, your research previous to the workshop, I think it's fundamental. And having crystal clear with if it's a company, a contractor, if it's a workshop that you design and open to the public, to have crystal clear what that experience is for. You might call it purpose if you want to. This is for me fundamental, and to get beyond the superficial goals or desired results, and really get to what's the secret sauce that people want to extract from that experience, or if you want a more negative perspective, what hidden agendas might be present, and help surface them, both individually and in a corporate agenda. I think this is, for me, it's fundamental. The second thing is to train yourself as a facilitator to be present in a certain kind of way. Well, I think I see it as actors and actresses do. They have to train concentration and attention at the same time. But training those two capabilities at the same time, I think it's very important for a facilitator, because you have to be concentrated to know what's the purpose of your session. And if you have a plan, what's the plan? But also be very attentive to the people that you are working with, and adjust in every minute or second sometimes. And for me, when I have time, a strategy that I really like to use, a more concrete strategy, is just to have unplanned time at the beginning of the workshop. For instance, if it's a 4-hour workshop, we have like an hour of just conversation to get to know people, to explain the rules, the purpose, and to extract how people are feeling in that precise moment and what they expect from the experience. So just unplanned conversation time at the beginning, if we have that time. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Very interesting. When I piece this, like, go and find out the hidden agendas, like try to somehow get to them. Very often they're present. You're going to find something if you go looking for them. And also going back to the example of the horror story that you shared, right, with people actually being not ready or open. I guess that I know I haven't yet used it myself, but I've heard that a lot of facilitators are successfully using the stinky fish to surface that, at like giving a very visual, basic framework to talk about those issues at the beginning of a session and surface them and put them on the table. If we're talking about concrete tools. Okay, Will, how about you? Like some.
I think Patricia's made a great point in the chat that reminds me around, I guess, like trying to finding the balance of silence. And so I think in situations where maybe there are dominating voices, or there is someone who is always filling the space, I think there's a whole number of, I guess, practical activities you can do. So you can kind of create time for silent reflection. If you're having a discussion about a direction that you should be taking for whatever purpose, what design you should go with, what you want to prototype, and it's just descending into more discussion that's being dominated, then again, you can do things like sort of dot voting, anything that essentially brings silence into it quite deliberately to give people space and time, because not only does it force the person or people who are dominating to stop doing that, it therefore buys more reflective people. I think you were talking about earlier, Anna Maria, like the talk to think and think to talk. It kind of brings balance. And I think also as facilitators, and this is what Patricia I think highlights, we don't need to fill all of the silences. If there's too much silence, I think that like we've already touched on, that can be challenging. But I think Joao's kind of hit the nail on the head. Like if you manage to get people to care about what's happening, and if people find meaning in the session, then those silences will come to an end quite naturally. So that you can kind of have confidence that they will naturally come to the end. And if they don't, it's the age-old thing of just asking different people in the group for their opinions, or as Cheska's touched on, kind of time boxing. All right, you guys have had sort of some time to reflect now. Maybe we're struggling to articulate our thoughts. How about we each just go around and we've got a minute to share our thoughts as coherently or incoherently as we want. I think something that I think remote sessions really empowers is giving people the time to do a little bit of individual reflection, a little bit of individual work, a bit of time to themselves to then come back to the group. I think we can manage and build time for that silence and that personal reflection better than we can in person, where people, even if you're kind of trying to have a brainstorm session and you've said, look, suspend judgment, focus on your ideas, and then we'll have time to share back, you'll still always get people who want to start talking halfway through the allotted brainstorming time. And I think in those situations, as a facilitator, tell them to stop talking. I think sometimes we can be a bit nervous as facilitators of confronting people who are being disruptive. You've got to be mindful. Sometimes this is better to do in a break, taken to one side. Sometimes you can also take the risk and just do it in front of the rest of the group if you're confident that it'll be received well. It's a risky move, but I have done it, because sometimes I think if you can identify that someone doesn't realize what they're doing, and you know that you're within a team that trusts each other very well, and it clearly seems sort of out of character, then I think you can do it, because they'll trust the other people in the group enough that they're not losing face. Again, there's all sorts of cultural things you build in. There is sort of certain cultures in all senses, whether that's parts of the world or just different industries, where I would do that and where I wouldn't do that.
This is I like that we have to be courageous, right? As facilitators at times. And this takes me back to this. I think it's much easier to be courageous if you've already told people that potentially at certain moments you will have to be courageous and bring the conversation back on track. So going back to those rules at the beginning. And I think that when I first started learning about facilitation and I attended the train the trainer course, the first tool that I learned was, do not start a session without a parking lot. Introduce it. Tell people what that is. That is for all the thoughts that inevitably will pop into our heads as we talk about our goal for the session, where we are going to park them and we're going to come back to them in a different day, in a different shape and form, just not today. So people will know that, okay, if my mind inevitably goes to somewhere tangent, the facilitator is allowed, because they told me that that's what the parking lot is. So it will not come as a surprise when I say, oh, well, thank you so much. That's actually a great point. And we're going to park it and come to it at the end if we have time. And if not, we see how we kind of solve that. So the person is heard. They were seen, they were heard, and they kind of understood, okay, that my point is not invalid. It's not that it's not useful. It's just not for today. It's valid and useful. And so this, you reminded me of the parking lot, which I think it's interesting. So Anne also says she likes to do a pre-event form like a survey, I think, to determine who are the participants managing and leading and what resources they might have available, so that she can go into the session focus on relevant, meaningful, actionable content in the same mindset as the participants. And I think that when we're in plenum and we're kind of like in control, we might step in and direct and manage the situations, but very often we're working with breakout rooms in both offline as well as online. And there's a question in the chat from Anne, which I thought was very interesting. How do you approach situations like breakouts with difficult personalities, different people in workshops? Because you can't be present in all the breakouts at all times, so you cannot steer the conversation. So I guess that we're kind of going into a risk of sending people off in breakouts and having those difficult personalities derail the breakout. She tries to pop in, but that can be intrusive for short exercises. Any ideas there also from the room? Please pop them in the chat if you've got any thoughts here.
Sometimes if I've got multiple difficult voices, I'll put them all in a breakout room together and not necessarily watch the chaos ensue. But I think when if you've got, let's say you're running a workshop with 9 people, 3 of them have particularly dominating voices and have dominated the conversation so far, then for me it makes sense to let 6 people across 2 rooms to have maybe a calmer, an environment that's more likely to encourage them to share. And then put the 3 dominating voices in one, and almost, I'm a big believer in, I guess, in creative tension. And I think actually those, even if they do descend into shouting matches, I think actually it'll probably be quite productive for those people, because that's how they like to work that way. So let's give them the opportunity to work that way. I do also find I think in breakout rooms there is a bit of a different dynamic, because if the facilitator isn't there, sometimes people's behavior does change in the breakout rooms. People might become more confident because they're with people they trust, or with teams, or they're not being judged by a facilitator, or they quieten down because they're not trying to show off in front of the facilitator. I guess, practically, something Anna Marie's just touched on, I think giving forewarning that I will be jumping between the rooms to answer questions and help encourage conversation and just keep things moving along. I just call it out at the start, and then put my own reservations or awkwardness aside and just dive in. Often I'll dive in, sort of observe what's going on, and if they're in flow, then I'll just leave again, rather than thinking I have to go in and talk to them.
One very cool thing that we have at Butter, I'm going to make a parenthesis, is the observe functionality for breakouts, which comes very in handy because it gives us as facilitator this in-between space to observe what's happening without being intrusive. So we can hear and see the participants and hear their conversation, but we are not present. They don't see us. We don't simply pop in the room to disrupt the flow when someone's talking, etc. So that's a very practical tool for specifically these reasons. My overview, I can simply observe, is the conversation flowing? Is everything running as it should be? Then there's no reason for me to come in. But again, what Will was saying, giving them a fair warning that is going to happen. So I am going to observe your conversation just to make sure that everything, that it flows. So prepare people for that as well. Joao, anything to add there?
Now, regarding breakout rooms, I don't know if this is an excuse that I made for myself, or just to be coherent with the theories that I like. But I really like to think about facilitation as a shared responsibility activity. And I made that very, very clear from the start to the people that I'm working with. So obviously, I have the responsibility to design the activities, if they are breakout rooms, for instance, that are clear and easy to understand, and for participants to engage in the breakout rooms. And if I haven't done a good job doing that, people might call me and I will clarify. But I tend not to pop up in breakout rooms because I openly say that it's their responsibility to make it work there when I'm not present. And if they decide to take that time to do anything else, that's their responsibility. And that will show in the debrief after the breakout room. And that's it. So there's always at least half of the responsibility or the control of the session that I deliberately let go as a facilitator. And this helps me not to think too much if people are doing what they're supposed to, because what happens, right? And then we work around it or through it.
I love that so much. And I think that comes with practice. I guess that at least at the beginning of the journey to becoming a facilitator, we kind of feel that responsibility a lot, and that responsibility manifests in over controlling. And I guess it's very freeing up for both you and maybe participants are feeling that as well, when you're becoming aware that you are responsible for the process, but actually the outcome and what's happening in there and the result of that process that you've put in place and guiding people through, it's entirely and fully up to the group. And I've also heard what might be horror stories from facilitators telling me, we set out to do one thing, and through that process, we reached a totally different result. And some people might say, I failed as a facilitator, but then on the other hand, I'm like, I have not failed, because at the end of the day, we realize that that's not what the group needs. That's not what the group cares about most now. So we made progress because we're closer to what the real pain points are and what the things that really matter to people are. And so I think that's an awesome reflection to kind of wrap up. I see still some typing in the chat. Time was too short for this conversation because there's so much to unpack there. And I absolutely love your perspectives on kind of, maybe it's not as much about the tools, although tools are great. And I guess that at the beginning, again, coming back to an unseasoned facilitator, tools is very comforting to have those tools in your toolbox and be able to pull them out. But as the time goes and we gain more and more experience, we realize that it's more about the mindset and maybe the philosophy behind it and the openness and the letting go of control. And that's where sometimes, or very often, very unexpected magical things can happen. And I guess that's a really cool thought to take away. And speaking of takeaways, I would very much love to invite everyone in the room to kind of take a second to reflect of all the conversation, the bouncing back and forth of the chat and everything we discussed about in the past hour, and distill that into one word. Type it in the poll to the left and submit your answer on that bar. One thing, what insight that is left with you that sparked something and you're taking away. Okay. Please send your requests. Don't forget to hit that button. Otherwise, your replies won't pop on the other side. I see meaning. I see parking lot. I see courage. I see letting go. I see facilitation is a shared responsibility. Wonderful. Keep them coming. And in the meantime, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Will and Joao for being here, for generously sharing their success story, their horror stories, their tips, I don't know how I would do. I don't know what I would do in the situation. It happened to me. What would you do? Like all of the questions. That was lovely, beautiful to see. Thank you so much. Very valuable. Thank you everyone for joining and tuning into the conversation. We are having our next session, remote product leadership done right, starting in 15 minutes. So we hopefully see you there. And let's see if we have any other questions, answers here. Okay, that's it. I'm ending the poll and I'm giving everyone a big round of applause. And wish you all an amazing rest of the day, wherever you are. Take care.